Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Wacky Races, brought to us by Atlus. Wacky Races, based off of the 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoon, has you controlling Dick Dastardly and Muttley, well, specifically Muttley, who ends up being sent off by Dick Dastardly consistently to do various tasks, mainly to try to help him win the race, though they always end up finishing in last place. This game is broken up into 10 levels. You get a little bit of deciding what you want to do first, going either to A, B, or C first, but we're just going to go ahead and do them in order, starting with A. You can see Dick Dastardly has chased a homing pigeon and crashed, and now you have to rescue him. So Muttley sets off to rescue Dick. Now as Muttley, you're able to jump and bite. You have a few abilities you can see at the bottom of the screen, and they cycle through every time you grab a bone item, similar to grabbing the power-ups in the Gradius series. The power-ups that you have are the bomb that you can throw out a bomb, you have the bark, which you bark, and then it sends out a projectile straight out. You think that would be very useful, but honestly the bomb ends up being the more useful of the attacks. You also have the float ability, which is that wing, and then health. The first couple of times that you use the health power-up, you not only refill your health, but also give yourself another piece of your health meter. Once you've maxed that out, every time you use it, you just end up replenishing your health. And what's great is, even when you lose a life and lose your other power-ups, you don't lose the health containers. Those heart containers stay once you've unlocked them. Be careful going through these couple of rooms here. Bunch of enemies and some spikes lining the ground that can easily do damage to you. While you have a bit of invulnerability as Muttley every time you get hit, it's not very long. In fact, you can get hit multiple times pretty quickly, and that includes in the boss encounters. For the bosses, you want to make sure that you use either the bomb or the bark. I recommend the bomb, as it's a little faster, and it has the arc to it that you can use to your advantage at certain times. For the first boss, we're battling the gruesome twosome here. They start off by jumping back and forth, and then will jump up into the air, firing out a giant ball anywhere towards Muttley. This is something that you'll see consistently with enemies, firing out these giant cannonballs towards wherever Muttley is standing all throughout the game. Each boss has two forms. Once you've taken out the first form, the second one is a little bit tougher, usually going faster or adding a new move into the mix. Most part here, you're going to be dodging the gruesome twosome by getting underneath of them and continuing to throw out those bombs. Once they're taken care of, we're moving on to A-2. Be very careful all throughout the desert level that you don't end up getting sucked into the quicksand below. It's very easy to do that. The cactuses will also hurt you if you land on them, so keep that in mind while you're doing your platforming. Thankfully, most enemies can be taken out with a single bomb, so if you time it correctly, a lot of times you can just kind of keep moving without having to slow down all that much. Be careful of the giant flame enemy that's going to come flying towards you during this segment. Just keep moving forward and then jump up onto the pipes. Anytime you refill your health meter at the bottom, when you get up to that health, use it if you like, even if you have full health, just so you can get those heart containers going. The next area, we go inside of this pyramid. Thankfully, we can use the bombs to take out a couple of the enemies that are going to get in our way. Watch out for the giant weight that comes crashing down. In the next rooms, you have these statues in the background, or sarcophaguses, I guess, that are able to somehow throw off their heads. Either way, they just watch out for the top portion here and keep on moving over to the right side. A little bit of a maze, but nothing that you have to really worry about trick-wise. Just work your way over to the right and then down to the bottom level, and over to the right more, watching out for some spikes along these platforms. If the weight does hit you, you do get a funny animation of Muttley being crushed, which is funny for a few moments, but ends up taking away some time. The thing is, I get hit by another one right as I jump for the door, but since I get hit and go to the door at the same time, it negates it, which is pretty funny. The next boss encounter is against Army Surplus Special with Sergeant Blast and Private Meekly controlling it. With the quicksand, this is a tricky fight for sure. Just kind of keep bouncing on the quicksand itself and throwing out bombs towards them to take out the first form. The second form is a bit harder with missiles that kind of move around and chase you a little bit, and ones that bounce around. Still pretty much more of the same of you just focusing on firing at him. He can't run you over really, he's not going to come that far. But the missiles themselves can be a little bit tricky to actually dodge, so focus on attacking him and he should go down in just a few hits. Onwards to the third level here, you can see some giant enemies that you have to deal with. Thankfully the bombs are very useful for even taking out giant gorillas in a single hit. Be very careful of the platforming during a couple of the areas here with the giant pit there. Here's another giant pit, so be sure to climb on up. You can use your float ability to help you a little bit getting over any gap really in the game. There's some levels where you can float through most of the stage, just keep jumping and floating. Watch out for the snake-like enemy at the very end there. He doesn't end up hitting you and knocking you back into the pit, and then finish up the first area of the level. The second area is a forest-themed place. You can use some of the broken pieces of the tree to jump on as platforms and float along the top portion of the area. If there's just a couple of enemies on screen, sometimes the game can start to slow down, which can sometimes help you out and other times just end up being a nuisance when trying to time certain jumps. Watch out for the giant spike enemy at the end of the area going up and down, and then go onto the sign and make it to the next area of the stage. Here inside more of the pyramid-like area. There's a few of the moving up and down giant piles of spikes as we reach the end and get into the boss encounter. Next up we have Rufus Roughcut and Sawtooth in the Buzz Wagon, and they gonna bounce around a little bit as well as drive over the level, and thankfully you can duck into these little pits, still throwing out your bombs and being actually able to hit the enemy while also being safe from their attacks, or being run over at least. The second form is more of the same, but they will fire out like a cannonball that will come towards you, and one that will roll along the ground and slowly trace the lining of the stage, and then do more of the rolling over of you. So just make sure that you're ready to duck into the pits when necessary and finish them off. After completing an area, you get a little cutscene, and you get to select which of the areas you want to go to next. We're going to go right into B, where once again, Muttley is being sent off, this time to get a new engine for Dick Dastardly. Be very careful of this area. Even though Muttley's able to swim perfectly fine in another area of the game, we can't swim here. We just end up falling and splashing into the water, losing a life. So basically, they're just giant pits, so be very careful of the water areas of this area. In general is actually pretty easy. There's not a whole lot of enemies. There's just a couple that are going to come at you, and there's no real threat of being knocked into the pits or spikes that you have to deal with either. In some ways, I honestly find this level a little bit easier than the very first level of the game. And considering you could do this one first if you wanted to, it makes sense to have this one be on about the same level. The second area has a bunch of broken bridge parts, as well as some giant orcas that are going to jump out of the water and try to grab a hold of you. Be careful of those. There's octopus enemies as well that can fire out projectiles. A single bomb will help you out, but at the same time their projectiles can be a little bit of a pain to try to get past them, especially at the rate they like to fire sometimes. At any point when you get a little bit low on health and you have the ability to, just go ahead and refill that health meter. It's always a good thing to do. Here we have Peter Perfect and the Turbo Terrific. Honestly though, not really that perfect of a fight. Pretty easy overall. In fact, I think even easier than the Gruesome Twosome. Moving back and forth, sometimes we'll jump up to the platform you're on, but you actually can easily jump over him. Just keep throwing those bombs out as he will keep kind of coming up at you and you can take out the first form. Then for the second form, it's pretty much more of the same, just moving quicker. Speeding along the bottom part, going back and forth really quick, but still giving you plenty of opportunity to deliver bomb attacks, and then be able to follow up by jumping over the car to avoid getting hit. Next level is an underwater level. You have to swim as Muttley, which isn't the best controlling, but it is pretty straightforward. You don't have to press any button to actually swim, you just use the directional buttons to move Muttley around. The hitbox around Muttley is such that you're able to actually sometimes sneak between yourself and some enemies and walls, so you don't have to destroy every enemy, but usually easier just to destroy them before trying to sneak on past. Be very careful, of course, there's lots of spikes lining the walls of this area. Sometimes, unfortunately, if you don't get far enough down, the bomb that you throw out will end up being hit by the ceiling. The second area of the stage is an underwater sunken ship. As you can see, I can sneak between the shark here and get into the ship itself. Just keep going back and forth, swimming through the area, watching out for the few enemies that are going to get into your way. Thankfully, other than the little bit of awkward controls using the swimming, it's really not going to be that challenging to get Muttley through this place. Be careful of the shark as well as then the two crabs right here. It's a tight little space that you have to kind of get Muttley through. But that is the end of the area. Just swim on up and go to the sign, then move on to the boss encounter, this time against Professor Pat Pending. For this flying machine that you have to deal with, he does fly above you and come crashing down, but this gives you plenty of opportunity to deliver nice hits to him. He'll also bounce around the stage, giving you plenty of opportunity to run underneath of him, avoiding his attacks. The second part of the fight, he'll fly up in the center of the screen and throw out two of the giant balls or cannons at you. Dodge them and then get a bomb ready to throw as soon as he lands if you want to get a nice quick hit in. He'll bounce off of either the left or right side and then go back to the center. You can see what side he's going to bounce on because of the direction that he's facing, so it gives you a very easy pathway to know where to stand to be the safest during the course of this fight. It'll take a little bit to take him out just because he does fly a lot, and staying up at the top part of the screen allows him to avoid you being able to actually hit him. But once he goes down, we're moving on to level number 6. This level is a little bit overall weird in its design, for sure. Be careful of a few giant bug enemies that you have to deal with. Some may try to get in your way when you're jumping over gaps so they could hit you and potentially knock you back, so you gotta be extra cautious of that. Thankfully, the float allows us safe passage over a few jumps without having to deal with some enemies. Be very careful on these singular platforms. These are always difficult. Hopefully you do have that float so you can get over the gap. Second area, be very careful. There's more gaps to deal with. The whole level in general is just kind of a weird, almost Sonic-esque in a way level. I do find it funny that Wacky Races only lasted a handful of episodes, but because of replays and the like, it ended up getting a video game in 1992. Well, 91 in Japan, but 92 in North America, and because of it being such a late NES release, it's become a relatively expensive game to get a hold of nowadays. Next up is Penelope Pit Stop, probably one of the most famous of the characters from Wacky Races, ended up getting a spin-off all of her own. She likes to jump up to the top part of her level, the pyramid thing, and then fly up into the air sometimes. Just keep throwing those bombs out, and you can hopefully hit her quite a bit during this stage. Her jump only lasts a second, and if you time it right, you can deliver 2 or potentially 3 hits in the center area before she even moves again. Next, we're going to the Area C, Go Go America, and we have 4 more levels left to go. First up is an ice-themed level, which you immediately know what to expect during this. You can slip and slide, that's for sure, so you have to be extra cautious when platforming and jumping throughout the course of this level. It's very easy to run into some enemies or potentially fall into one of the pits. You do have a few new enemies to deal with, some sliding enemies as well as jumping snowmen. One of the things I love about the game is that there are a good variety of enemy types. It's always changing up between the various levels, and I think that's always the sign of a at least somewhat interesting platformer. The next area, not ice, but this time clouds, and yes, you bounce on them constantly. Every time you land, you're going to end up bouncing, so you can use that to your advantage or get extremely annoyed as you slowly try to make your way through the course of this level. I usually like this level, being able to bounce over some enemies and get some interesting platforming done because of it. Be careful, especially right here, of a few enemies that are coming out of the ground, but there's the giant pit that will cost you a life if you end up falling down in it. Next up is Red Max. Moving up and down will fire out giant missiles out at you, thankfully pretty slow so you can easily move out of the way. Also watch out as he will dash across the screen trying to run into you that way. The second form is pretty much more of the same, coming at you in the same kind of patterns, coming straight across the screen, giving you a lot of opportunity to deliver bomb attacks. That platform in the middle of the level is also extremely useful for being able to dodge him most of the time. Next up, there's a few pits to start us off in this wonderful little neighborhood. Some bouncing robotic Mutleys will attack you during this level. They're an interesting enemy for sure, as well as killer plants, jumping piranha-like plants trying to grab a hold of you. Muttley's float is always useful for getting across some of these areas. The second area, though, is at a nice little cityscape. I think there's a nice little background going on as you jump between these various buildings. This area is more challenging than the previous one, as you can get knocked back, of course, in the pits here. Thankfully though, by flying overhead and taking the upper path a lot of times, we can avoid that potential danger. Take the upper path here. That's the only way you'll be able to get across the gap to the right. Then jump over to the sign and get ready for the battle against the anthill mob. They'll start off, they'll fire cannon shots at you and then drive across the bottom, going back up to the other side and then doing the same back. This is only for the first form. The second form, they're going to be jumping up towards you in that center area, so be ready. Thankfully, going back and forth between the platforms is a nice strategy, though, for avoiding most of the damage from them and being able to still deliver hits of your own. Once you deliver that final hit, the ant mob's taken care of, and now we're moving on to the second to last area. Next up is a Western-themed area. You have some guys that will fire out bullets at you, as well as a bunch of animal enemies as well. I do like a few of the animal enemy sprites throughout the course of this area. Taking the upper path along the rooftops here allows you to get across safely. There's just a few enemies though, so either way you could probably get across that area without too much trouble. Use the platforms along this area and avoid having to go down. And reach the sign at the end going inside of this cave. For this cave you have a bunch of giant rocks that will kind of roll towards you, some of which are easy to dodge, other ones you'll have to run away from in order to avoid. A lot of times, especially if I have a pretty good amount of health, I may just take a hit from one of the boulders just to keep moving straight. You can get crushed by them, like with the weights earlier, so if you want to see that funny animation again, you can go ahead and get crushed by the various rocks here. Next up is the Arkansas Chugabug. And they're going to start off by moving across the bottom, then jumping up onto the first platform that they come to, riding off of it, and then going across, bouncing off the wall, and then repeating that same process. Very easy pattern to get used to, and you can just jump between the platforms to keep on hitting them and get into that second form. For the second form, you will have to deal with cannonball shots. They will fire out as they jump around, landing in the center part of the screen. They'll always fire out then, so you can be prepared to try to get out of the way, though it can sometimes be a little tricky. Onwards to see for the final level of the game, and no, it's not an explosive level, but either way we have some giant Easter Island-like heads facing off against us, as well as more of the giant rocks that we dealt with in the mine area just in the previous place. Thankfully, there's a decent amount of space for you to get away from the rocks during this area, so they shouldn't cause too much trouble. Go along the bottom here, watching out for the last rock, and then hitting the sign, and move on to the second area of the stage. Here you have a waterfall going on. Kind of cool effect for that. I always liked waterfalls in pretty much any game. Watch out for the fish during the segment. You can take them out, but they will try to stop some of your jumps. If they hit you, you may end up getting knocked back into the pit. Be careful at the very end, a few singular platforms as you jump into the final boss encounter. Here we have the Boulder Mobile, and the Slag Brothers are the ones driving it. They will drive across, fire out a cannon shot, and then retreat, and then they'll jump back and forth, kind of like making a little bit of like an earthquake, though it doesn't shake the screen or anything like that. You can just keep throwing the bombs at them during that. The second form, they will throw out clubs that will bounce along the ground. It's kind of weird how they float like that, as well as the giant cannonball like blast as well. It's a bit of a pain to get through this fight, but hopefully you have enough health to survive the few hits you may take, and then you can enjoy the ending, the Wacky Races, on NES. So there you have it, Wacky Races on the NES. A fun little platformer. I really have always enjoyed it since I first discovered the game. Just being able to play as Muttley in a platformer is fun, and the different abilities, mainly the bomb, gives the game a fun feel to it as far as dealing with the various enemies all throughout. I do like the end here as Dastardly crashes into a pole, and we have the end, and Muttley fittingly snickering is the way this game ends up wrapping up, and that's also going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.